And now on BBC Radio Cumbria, it's our special European Union referendum debate, recorded last week and presented by our political reporter, Bob Cooper.
Hello and welcome to this special EU referendum debate. You're listening to BBC Radio Cumbria and I'm Bob Cooper.
The EU referendum debate on BBC Radio Cumbria with Bob Cooper.
Welcome to listeners. We're at the North Lakes Hotel in Penrith, so thanks to the venue here for hosting us. And we're in the newly refurbished suite, the Vereda suite, which I'm told is the Roman name for Penrith. Now, let's welcome our panel. We've got three panellists who are arguing for us to leave the European Union, and three who believe we should remain. Those arguing for out are Fiona Mills, who's the Cumbria chairman of UKIP and a Vote Leave campaigner. We've also got Brent Kennedy, who's the Carlisle secretary of the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, which is campaigning for an exit, and Adrian Rawlinson, the managing director of Marl International in Ulverston, which manufactures LEDs and exports to Europe and elsewhere. Our panellists on the other side of the debate think we should stay in. They are Julie Ward, a Labour MEP for the North West, whose office is in Workington, Alistair McIntosh, who is a Cumbrian delegate for the National Farmers Union and a farmer in Ravenglass, and Bill Lowther from Wigton, who's the former head of the films and packaging arm of the international company UCB. Welcome to you all, and thanks for joining us. And thanks indeed as well to our audience who've come from all across the county this evening. We've got people from up in the northwest in Silloth, down in the South Lakes and the Furness Peninsula, and here in Penrith and the Eden Valley as well. So many thanks. We're just going to start, before we crack on with the debate, there are a lot of people out there, many people listening, perhaps people in the audience as well tonight, who don't necessarily have a detailed understanding of the EU and how it actually works. So we're just going to take a few minutes to talk about that. And I'm just going to go to Julie Ward, who is a member of the European Parliament, just to talk for a minute about how the EU works and what its purpose is.
Well, the EU is made up of a number of institutions, and I'm a democratically elected member of the European Parliament. And the European Parliament has full legislative powers. And the Council, which is a different institution, is made up of the democratically elected national governments, and it legislates together with the Parliament. Then there's the Commission, which drafts and proposes legislation, and that is elected by the Council and the Parliament together. So those three institutions work together to come to common agreement about a number of issues which affect Europeans.
Fiona Mills, what's your take on the EU and how it works?
Well, first of all, this referendum for me is about sovereignty and democracy. I don't believe that the EU is democratic in any way. It's absolutely anti-democratic, in fact. Yes, Julie is a democratically elected MEP, but the fact is the MEPs have no power. The power resides with the Commission, and they are unelected, and they are the ones that propose the laws.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. First of all, we've got a question from Graham Moore from Carlisle. Have we got Graham Moore?
How can the UK control immigration when the EU has open borders and free movement throughout? Bearing in mind, Prime Minister Cameron fully backs Turkey joining and has already spent UK taxpayers' money supporting this.
Okay, well, first of all then, let's go to you, Bill Lowther. What's your take on that question?
Immigration is clearly an important issue, and it's obviously a worry to people in areas where they can't get school places, or they have to queue in terms of a surgery or going to hospitals and all of that. But on the other hand, we have to be very careful in the sense of that, for what it's worth, I met this particular weekend, because I live in the Lake District, a man from India who I'd never met him before. And he said to me that he asked for some directions to whatever. And in the brief chat I had with him, he said that he was from India. I asked him what job he did. He said he was a surgeon. I asked him that where he was living. He said the south of England. I said, what do you think of the UK and so on? He said, well, I've lived here for 5 years. And he said, I've enjoyed living in your country. But in reality, me and my family now, we're starting to feel a bit like lepers. And on the basis of that, I'm intending before the end of the year to move out with myself and my family and back to India. And I'd say in all of that, you know, I believe the people who talk about these things don't intend to give that impression of making folk feel like what I've just been describing, but it doesn't stop them feeling like that. And the reality is I've personally been to hospital because I'm a diabetic and had some problems with my eyes. And I've seen 5 consultants in the Cumberland Infirmary, 2 of whom were clearly from overseas. And so in all of it, we have to tackle these issues around immigration, but be careful about it.
But Bill Lowther, what many people are concerned about is the numbers of people who are coming into the country. I mean, net migration, according to the latest figures, is 333,000 people a year. So that's the number of people coming into the country minus the number leaving.
Right.
Do you think that there's a number that's too high?
I believe that has to be addressed. But it's whether you can address it or have to do it outside the European Union, or you can address it within side. We also have to do some things ourselves, you know. We're actually bringing to this country, because we don't have nurses of our own, thousands of nurses from overseas. There's a fundamental training problem in all that. Why are we not training our own people to be nurses? But in reality, if you decide to do that, then you don't do it by turning a switch. It'll take something like maybe 3 years or more to be or to train people to do those jobs.
Okay.
And we have to look at the issues between ourselves and sort some of these things out.
Okay, thank you, Bill Lowther. Adrian Rawlinson, what's your response to that question?
Well, I'd have to say I agree with what a lot of Bill said, because what Bill just said, he said we have to be very careful, and we do. And I think the fundamental issue is control. I see absolutely no problem with migration, people coming to this country, and they should be very welcome but in a way that is controlled, in a way that we can accommodate it, and in a way that they're encouraged to come here and contribute positively to our society and our economic prosperity. But I think we're in a better position to do that if we have control over it, rather than being told what to do by Brussels or perhaps by Berlin.
Okay. Okay, many thanks, Adrian Rawlinson. Alistair McIntosh.
Excuse me, I'd like to say something about this.
We'll go to Alistair McIntosh first, and then we'll come to you later, Julie Ward.
Well, Graham, I think this debate has been, I'll not say hijacked, but it seems to be hugely important, the immigration issue. And people often talk about Turkey and the flood from Africa into Europe. I think it's very clear that it's going to be a long time before Turkey gets into Europe. I think it's also true that not everybody from Turkey will come here. I think we have to be aware of the fact. We also have to be aware of the fact that illegal immigration is exactly what it is. The word illegal is something that we do have control over. We do have control over migration or immigration from outside the EU, but with a common market and a common labour policy, then people are able to move from Europe to this country. Likewise, people from this country can move into Europe without any restrictions. Now, I think that's a good thing, because that helps our economy. We have people who come over here, they're not able to pick up any social benefits until they've been resident here now for 4 years. They contribute to our economy, they pay their taxes, and they drive our economy just as much as we do. Likewise, there are people go the other way from UK into Europe and benefit Europe as well. But the thing is, we mustn't confuse European citizens coming into this country to work honestly and correctly with those who come across illegally from other non-EU countries.
Okay, Alistair McIntosh, thank you. And Brent Kennedy, what's your take on this? Are you concerned about, there are some concerns among many people about the effect on wages of people working in this country. How do you feel about immigration?
Well, I was an economic migrant. For 19 years I lived and worked in Germany. And let me say, not only in Britain, but in every country, the politicians scapegoat migrants to divert public attention away from their own failures. We have a housing shortage in this country. It's because politicians have made white British politicians have made conscious decisions not to build any council houses for 30 years. We could house 1 million people tomorrow. There's 1 million empty homes. In Carlisle alone, 1,586. We asked the council to take them over to house the people made homeless in the floods. They didn't even pursue it. On wages, it's not migrant workers or women workers who have to work now when their children are younger, or older workers who have to work until 65, women, and then later to 67. It's not these workers who are to blame. It's the employers who exploit them and divide and rule to push down. And it's the unfortunate thing is, migrant labourers come in at a time when Gordon Brown, his mantra was flexible working. So they've driven down conditions of work and trade union rights and so on, and that's the problem. The problem lies with unscrupulous employers and the politicians.
Okay, many thanks, Brent Kennedy. Julie Ward, you had something to say about this.
Well, first of all, Brent, you know, I'm a union member, and collective action across the member states working with European Trade Union Congress is a way that we're dealing with this, because we have international solidarity with our trade union members and our trade union partners in other European countries. So I'm with you on that, but I don't believe the answer is to be out of the EU. I believe it's solidarity with our partners across Europe. Now, I arrived here tonight and I was served tea by a Czech waitress. She was very well mannered, she spoke very good English, she gave a very good service. And I'm really glad to see that where opportunities exist and those posts haven't been filled, that we are able to have a diverse workforce. My ancestors were Huguenots, which means they were amongst the very first large refugee wave that came to this country. And they brought with them craft skills, lace making skills. They settled in Nottingham and they brought the lace trade to Nottingham, and that was the foundation of the city of Nottingham's economic riches.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I do need to say something about...
Just a second, let's bring in Fiona Mills here. Fiona Mills, I mean, currently the UK does have control over how many people come from outside the EU, and net migration from outside the EU is actually higher, and it's well above where the government wants it to be and well above where UKIP wants it to be. So what makes you think that leaving the EU would make us any better able to get it down to the numbers that you want to see?
Well, at the moment, we have a very unfair immigration policy in the UK, because anyone in the European Union, all 500 million people, can come to this country if they want to, whether they have the skills we need, whether they're criminals, whoever they are. We have a huge problem whereby people outside the EU don't get the same access. Now, I work in the NHS and we have a massive shortage of doctors and nurses. We've more or less exhausted the European market. We need to go out to the likes of India, China, Canada, Australia, and we can't get people from there because it's international recruitment. It takes forever. But that's where it's unfair, you see, and we have to go through such a huge, long process to get people from those places. So we really need a very fair immigration policy, open to the whole world, not just the EU, so that people that we actually need in this country can come into this country and can come and work and make a contribution.
But we do hear this a lot from UKIP, don't we? This suggestion that if we left the EU, we'd be able to get more people in from the rest of the world. But actually, the number of people coming in from the rest of the world is still well above where Nigel Farage wants to see it. So surely you would have to really tighten down on both immigration from outside the EU as well as within the EU?
Well, it's not about UKIP, it's not about Farage, it's about the Leave campaign here. And basically what we would need to do is like I've said before, look at the deficit in this country, what do we need, and look at the people who are applying, have a strict sort of points system for people coming into this country. And we've said before, we haven't got enough doctors and nurses in this country. We should look to train more in this country.
Okay. All right, I want to bring in some members of the audience. Sorry, excuse me a second. Yep. I want to bring in some members of the audience. Is there anyone who feels that immigration is a big issue here in Cumbria? Because we have currently in the county, the latest estimates are about 20,000 non-UK born people, 10,000 of those from the EU and 10,000 from elsewhere in the world. Does anyone feel that it's an issue here? Yes, you, madam, on the front row.
Well, just to say, I'm glad we're having a respectful debate, and let's keep it like that. But just to go over a couple of things, and it's such an emotive issue, isn't it? My father was very interested in the NHS and helped to set it up in Cumbria. But I believe at the moment that in terms of workers who are not, we could say, indigenous people, something like only 5% are from the EU. So it means that the people who work in the NHS coming from other countries are probably greater than that.
Okay, thank you, madam. And lady at the back there with the green jumper on.
If wages are being pushed down in this country, it's because of unscrupulous employers. It's not because of migrant workers. A lot of our workers' rights come because of European legislation. And I'm really anxious that the people who are campaigning to leave and want to free up business to be much more competitive, actually want to do away with the workers' rights that we have gained over the years. And that's a real concern for lots of workers.
You're listening to BBC Radio Cumbria, and this is a special EU referendum debate from the North Lakes Hotel in Penrith. I'm Bob Cooper.
The EU referendum debate on BBC Radio Cumbria with Bob Cooper.
Okay, we're joined by 6 panellists here and an audience. Arguing to remain in the EU, we have Julie Ward, who is a Labour MEP for the North West, Alistair McIntosh from the National Farmers Union, and Bill Lowther from Wigton, a businessman and former boss from the UCB group. And for leaving the EU, we have Fiona Mills, who's the Cumbria chairman of UKIP, Brent Kennedy from the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, and Adrian Rawlinson, who's the managing director of Marl International in Ulverston. And now, can we have a question, please, from David Siddall from Cockmouth?
Can the leaving panel indicate any independent peer-reviewed study which shows the true economic chaos that may arise from pulling up the drawbridge? Gove recently hinted at a few bumps in the road, which I think is an understatement. Could the financial markets, the Treasury, the IMF, the IFS, could they all be wrong?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, all right, okay. Brent Kennedy, you seem to think they're wrong. Why do you think they're wrong?
An economist wrote recently that the IMF and OECD and the others are very good to tell it. No, they're very bad at predicting the economic weather tomorrow, but they're very good at telling you that you should have been carrying your umbrella yesterday. So they're making up figures. It's propaganda. It's project fear. There's no basis to those figures at all. But there is a basis of the figures if we look back over recent years, and what we can say is that if the same share of national income went to wages today as it did 30 years ago, a worker on £20,000 today would be earning £32,000. Those on an average wage of supposedly £27,000 would be on £36,000 today, and that shows the inequality that's gone on because of the deregulation, privatisation, anti-union laws, the worst attacks on wages that we've had since the 1860s that have gone on, whether we're in the EU or out of the EU, because the same problems are affecting workers throughout Europe and throughout the world. There is real stagnation in the world economy since 2008, and one of the main reasons of that is this inequality, because a big share of the wealth now is going to a handful of people who are not reinvesting it. They're sending it to the tax havens, and those who work have got a smaller share, don't have demand for goods, and therefore we have stagnation. And so in or out, ordinary folk have got to fight for a bigger share.
Brent Kennedy, you're dismissing the forecasts of those institutions that were just mentioned. What about what the Trades Union Congress says about the economic impact? It says that people could be £38 a week worse off by 2030.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because the same institution, the TUC, pointed out last year that workers are already, not could be, maybe, possibly, but are already £50 a week worse off because of the aftermaths of the banking crash and the recession. At the same time, when profits have recovered and bankers are getting their bonuses like never before, we have to fight. We can't expect somebody from above, from the EU in Brussels, to give us anything. Those trade union rights, those working conditions, we fought for them. The women Ford workers won the right to equal pay, not some bureaucrats either in Westminster or Brussels.
Okay, many thanks. Okay, Julie Ward, would you like to respond to that?
Well, I'm a feminist, and I'm doing this job because I believe that our rights, our workers' rights and our equal rights for women, there are rights that are enshrined now within the EU. So it's not a if, but, or maybe. It is, these are our rights. Now, the question was about economics. 65 billion pounds capital flight has shifted from this country since Boris Johnson announced that he was going to be with the Leave campaign. So that's pension funds gone. That's investment in this country gone. I don't know what answers you've got about that, but that's actually predicted to get worse over the next week, and it's predicted to be 10 times worse post a decision to come out, if that's what the country chooses. And I was in a room with some people who work at HSBC Bank the other day, and they're very, very concerned. We know that certain banks are already very worried about the city. We haven't got much left in this country in terms of manufacturing. No. We haven't got much left, have we? So what have we got? The City of London.
Can we go back to the question? And I want to go back to Adrian Rawlinson to see what you think about this idea that there will be an economic impact, and what Julie Ward was saying, that there already is an economic impact.
I agree with Julie on that point. When David Cameron called for a referendum, we saw a pretty impact on my business pretty much after that. I mean, we're already in the chaos as a result of calling for it. Personally, I would prefer for them not to have been a referendum. But now that we're here, I would prefer to take advantage and use that opportunity, probably the last chance we'll have. And I think the deciding factor for me, and if I may just read this out, Bob, it's just a thing because I can't quote it without reading it. It's this point is that basically the economic argument to the people, to the federalists, it doesn't really matter them. What Jean Monnet said in the 1940s, accepting the fact that at that time it was a terrible time, and I understand the sentiment of why he said it, but he said in that point, he said, Europe's nations should be guided towards the superstate without their people understanding what is happening. This can be accomplished by successive steps, each disguised as having an economic purpose, but which will eventually and irreversibly lead to federation.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about a bit more about that particular aspect of the EU later on in the programme. But first I'm just going to go to Bill Lowther to see what your response is to this idea that there are these kind of forecasts of doom and gloom about the economy and whether you take them seriously.
Well, in all of this, you need to be careful. In terms of the forecasting, clearly we've got claims or fancy claims rolling from both sides. But if you try to look, never mind at forecasting, but rather at the facts of the position, if you take this country, in reality we have enormous debts. It's equal to more than 1,500 billion pounds. That's what's our national debt sitting. It's equivalent to £24,000 per person, every man, woman and child in our country. If you take the net interest bill, the money we have to find to pay the interest on those borrowings, it's equal to £36 billion. It's equivalent to the running of the whole of the police force and justice system in our country. If you look at Germany, the reality of it is that they have, where we have this £100 billion deficit on our balance of payments between what we buy and what we sell, the Germans have a 200 billion surplus. And within the same EU and within the same so-called bureaucracies. And so what is it that they're doing that we're not doing in terms of those level of borrowings? Also, if you look at, for example, India, we talked about dealing with the Commonwealth, which I happen to believe, by the way, is extremely important. I believe you need to deal with the world, but not to give up Europe one or the other kind of. I've run a business which I can tell you that we treated Europe as a very, very important part of what we were up to and doing, that I can tell you if I had a shop and somebody was buying 50% more or less, or 45, 50% of what I sold, I'd treat them as the best folk in the world. The customer is king, but I'd equally treat the people from the rest of the world. We dealt with Europe and we dealt with the rest of the world. And in
Okay.
They will be tough and difficult, I can tell you.
Okay, I'm going to go to Fiona Mills on this now.
Right, well, I don't worry about leaving the EU at all. There will be perhaps short-term a bit of chaos, but in the long run, and we've got to look in the long run, we've got to look to the future. If you study the work of Professor Tim Congdon, he says that we miss out on £185 billion every year because of lost opportunities within trade and all sorts of things. And obviously we pay a net 10 billion to the EU, which we don't see once we've handed it over. So we'd make savings there. Trade will not suffer. America trades more with the EU than we do. They're not in a political union. You do not need a political union in order to trade with other countries. And can I just say as well that the EU is protectionist and it puts tariffs on goods coming from outside the EU, which makes our food more expensive. So in the long run, our food would be cheaper when we have free trade agreements with the likes of Africa, who suffer because the EU put tariffs on their goods.
Okay, and Fiona Mills, I mean, you say that there might be a bit of short-term economic chaos, but in reality that could mean people losing their jobs and livelihoods, couldn't it?
No, not really. No, not at all. I mean, if you're trading, if you're making a product that other people want to buy, they are going to buy it from you. And we will still continue to trade with Germany. I mean, they're not going to produce lots of cars and then say, right, we're not going to sell them to you. I mean, get it down to a sort of sensible sort of thought process. Why do people trade with each other? Because they have goods and services that other people want to buy. That will not stop.
Okay. Alistair McIntosh.
Well, I think David's question's highly relevant. I think it's. I think that's what staying in the EU is all about. It would be very easy for me to throw a few sound bites about. It would be very easy for me to pick up on Fiona's last comment, being a farmer and a food producer, but I'll try and avoid that. 500 million affluent customers in the European Union, free trade, without tariffs, without any border controls, is immensely important to me as a farmer, never mind all the other businesses that rely on that as well. I have been fortunate enough to spend time representing farmers in Brussels, and I know how, if we were to come out, how our European partners would see us. There's no way they would give us free access that we have at present time. They would be very keen. We are very good at what we do. We're very good producers. We're very efficient. We're some of the best in Europe. And actually, we could put some of them out of business So there's no way without that free trade agreement would we have access to that market without tariffs. And as for some of the other agreements, you're right. Europe is protectionist. They protect us as well. Let's make no mistake. But for anybody that thinks 2 years is a long enough time to make new agreements, dream on. The European Union has been negotiating with Mercosur, the South American countries, for in excess of 10 years that I know of, and they still haven't come to an agreement.
Okay, anyone in the audience got any thoughts on that? Gentleman at the back there, please.
Thank you. So, to get something straight here, right, what the Leave camp is asking us to do is trust Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, Michael Gove. So we're expected to trust these people over these independent financial experts from across the world who are economics. Is that what we're supposed to do? Believe them over these people?
Okay, right. Yes, sir, at the front there.
Coming back to the question, we were asked if there are any economic experts who actually predict a favourable result on Brexit. But if you actually go to the Treasury's own reports, they don't actually predict an economic meltdown if we go for Brexit. I would suggest that actually whether we remain or whether we actually go, we'll find the economy of this country will continue to grow at a reasonable rate.
Okay. This is a special EU referendum debate on BBC Radio Cumbria, and we're at the North Lakes Hotel in Penrith. I'm Bob Cooper.
The EU referendum debate on BBC Radio Cumbria with Bob Cooper.
Okay, we're joined by 6 panellists today and a live audience as well. Arguing to remain in the European Union, we've got Julie Ward, who's a Labour MEP for the North West. We've got Alistair McIntosh from the National Farmers Union and Bill Lowther, who's a businessman from Wigton and a former boss from the UCB group. And for leaving the EU, we have Fiona Mills, who's the Cumbria chairman of UKIP, Brent Kennedy from the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, and Adrian Rawlinson, the managing director of Marl International in Ulverston. Now, let's have a question, please, from Zena Bergman from Cockermouth.
Cumbria has benefited from considerable EU funding and will continue to benefit if we remain in the EU. Where will this replacement funding come from if we leave?
Okay, Julie Ward, do we benefit from considerable EU funding?
Yes, we do, and that's because the largest budget within the EU is the Social Cohesion Regional Development Policy budget. And what the EU does is to look right across Europe, wants to bring up all its citizens to a decent standard of life. So it uses indexes of deprivation to work out where are the regions that are poorest, where they don't have proper services, where there are and when there's real problems in terms of employment, entrepreneurship, startups, and all the rest of it. And so Cumbria, along with other very peripheral regions like Cornwall, like the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, for example, like Wales, like Northern Ireland, like Teesside, all these regions which are poorer and more peripheral and further away from our capital city, London, all these regions get a lot of EU money. And the Northwest region has been a net beneficiary of regional development funding. What is really good about the EU is the way that it really champions the regions. It champions regional identity, regional culture. I don't believe that a London-centric government would necessarily give the same amount of funding. It wouldn't look to the regions in the same way. For example, the floods that we just had, the terrible, terrible floods that we just had, the EU solidarity funds are giving billions and billions and billions of pounds to all the flood-affected areas in England, and that is part of being in the EU. Now, we couldn't have expected our government to give that kind of money, and if they had given it, it would have been plundered from the NHS or it would have been plundered from some other budgets.
Okay. Thanks, Julie Ward. So Fiona Mills, the point Julie Ward's making is, we might have the money that we put into the EU if we left, but actually it's unlikely that a Westminster government would put that money into rural areas like Cumbria.
Well, I just want to make it clear that there is no EU funding, everybody. There is no EU funding. It is our money given back to us. We contribute about 20 billion a year. We contribute about 20 billion a year and we get 10 billion back. Now, that's not a very good deal to my mind. And we're told what to spend that 10 billion on. And a lot of it goes to farmers under the cap payments. We are told what to spend our own money on. It's all about control. So, yes, if we left the EU...
Fiona Mills, can I just come in there? We're not told what to spend the rebates on, though, are we? So we're not told how to spend that whole 10 billion.
Well, not all of it, but most of it. Well, anyway, they're giving us back our own money, basically. So all this funding you're talking about, EU funding, it's actually our own money coming back to us. Wouldn't it be better if we kept it all ourselves and decided the way we wanted to spend it on our priorities? And shouldn't our elected representatives, our MPs, make those decisions? If your MP doesn't stand up for your area, elect a new one that will, and will have a voice in Parliament and will say, actually, we need to invest in Cumbria. That's what you need to do. And then the money will come back to your own region. We can cut out the middleman and we can be in control of our own destiny. I think that's the best way forward, actually.
Okay. All right, Alistair McIntosh, if you're not happy with what the Westminster government's doing, you can just vote them out. Is that an argument that convinces you?
That sounds very fanciful to me, to be honest. This EU referendum is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We're not going to be able to revisit this. We're not going to come back and have another go at it in 5 years' time. This is for real. And as a farmer, I'm very aware of the European market. I know what happened when when that market is denied us, and there'll be people in the audience will recognise that as well. £3 billion comes back into the rural economy. Cumbria looks the way it is because farmers invest that money in land management, and they deliver on the environment, and they deliver affordable food. So not only does that come back to farmers, but it's also handed back to the consumer through a much, much cheaper food product. And quite frankly, take that away, and who's going to produce that food? Because we're already producing it below the cost of production.
Okay. Do we have any farmers in the audience who'd like to comment on this? Yes, you on the end, sir.
I think Alistair McIntosh knows very well that the Common Agricultural Policy is not a common policy for a start. It doesn't work, Alistair. It's broken. We all know that, and it needs fixing. And the question is, can it be fixed in Europe, or can it be fixed by this government? Now, there's a lot of people who say, oh, the government won't support food production in this country. I think that's absolute tosh. It would take them 6 months to realise what went wrong then. And at the moment, that money, you know as well as me, a lot of that goes to landowners, not working farmers. So it needs fixing. We can argue about how to fix it, but it needs fixing, Alistair.
I've never said for 1 minute that Europe is perfect. I'm a European. I want to be in there to make it better. Now, previous governments, regardless of what colour, has actually tried to deliver less and less support to my industry. And therefore, the European Union's money coming back, being passed through the rural economy, is a much, much more guaranteed and safer way to safeguard food production in this country. And that's massive.
All right, okay. I'm going to bring in Adrian Rawlinson here because you've got something to say about this.
Well, I think two wrongs don't make a right. I actually agree with Julie on that point, that I think that my perception is that Europe does consider the regions rather more than Westminster. But the point is this, is that basically whether it's, I don't think Westminster is any better than you lot in Brussels. And I think at least if we vote out, we've got a chance to have a government or representative that we can take to task if we don't like what they're doing. And if a Brexit were to happen, I've no doubt, we're talking about the economic, I think the impact in the short term would be very painful. But after that, I would like to see a much more democratic investment, particularly in the Lowry regions, not just in Cumbria, but in Scotland. And we need to take our government to task and completely reboot our economic and social systems, which would basically, I think everybody in Cumbria on both sides of this debate would agree is that's what we want to achieve.
Okay, and I'm just going to go back to the questioner. do you have any comment that you'd like to make on this? Are you convinced that if we were to leave the EU, we would still get some of this funding that we currently get?
I personally don't think that we benefit as much as what we do now by remaining in the EU.
And why is that?
I think what some of the comments we were saying about how, you know, everything's focused on Westminster and the South until, you know, we get more things devolved. If things like the Northern Powerhouse are going to happen and things like that.
Okay. All right then. I'll bring in Bill Lowther. You've got a point to make on this.
Yeah, I think in all of this, one needs to be kind of careful. When you talked about, Adrian, that in the short term there'd be some difficult problems, just let me tell you, I've sat on many boards, for right or wrong, and if I was sitting on a board and somebody came along and said, I would like to make an investment, let's say of £1 million or whatever it was, in a new production line, I would ask, as a board member, where are you proposing or planning that what it produces is going to be sold? And if they replied, which wouldn't surprise me, that let's say more or less half of its output would be going into the European area, I would then say, well, as part of the financial case that you've produced for this investment, have you, for example, taken the possibility that there may be some kind of tariffs introduced, which are kind of a tax? And if they replied no because they didn't believe it, they would say it won't happen. I would say, well, you think that, but you don't know that.
Okay.
And would I invest that million before that? And so I'd tell them that, look, I am happy to support, but not now. I prefer to support it as and when. And that'll cause a huge delay if you don't watch it in investment.
Okay, thanks, Bill Lowther. I'm going to bring in Brent Kennedy here because you've not spoken on this yet.
Actually, what Zena said, secondly, I actually share your mistrust of British politicians. I don't think we would get a good deal here. The thing is, to rely on Father Christmas in Brussels to do it for us isn't going to get us anywhere. And I think fundamentals, the EU was set up by big business and the banks. It's run in their interests. And I think Julie's answer before, they're scared about them moving capital out if this referendum doesn't go their way, is a confirmation of that, actually. So they've driven down wages, they've had privatisation, casualisation. We're not allowed... Is South Wales, is that a region that's going to get some money? Because the steelworks are going to close down if the EU gets their way, because we can't support them. We can't even nationalise industry. It goes against the rules of the EU. And I think this money to the regions is a sop that they do to buy folk off, really. I think this is the reason why the majority of working class people in this country are actually going to vote to leave, partly because they're alienated from Brussels, but also from the politicians in Westminster. They want to get rid of Cameron, they want to mix it up, they want something different.
All right, okay, thanks, Brent Kennedy. I'm going to have to move on to another question now because we are running short on time. This is a special EU referendum debate on BBC Radio Cumbria, and we're at the North Lakes Hotel in Penrith. I'm Bob Cooper.
The EU referendum debate on BBC Radio Cumbria with Bob Cooper.
Okay, we've got 6 panellists with us tonight. We've got 3 arguing to leave the EU. They are Fiona Mills, who is the Cumbria chairman of UKIP, Brent Kennedy from the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, and Adrian Rawlinson, who's the managing director of Marl International in Ulverston. And arguing to remain in the European Union, we have Julie Ward, who's a Labour MEP for the North West, Alistair McIntosh from the National Farmers Union, and Bill Lowther, who's a businessman from Wigton and former boss from the UCB Group. Now, let's move on to another question, and we've got one from Raymond Hall from Cockermouth, please.
Government by the people, for the people. Directives in the European Union are made by 28 unelected commissioners. Can the panel please tell me what is the European Union's definition of democracy?
Okay, thanks to the questioner there. Alistair McIntosh, you've worked in Brussels. Can you tell us what the European Union's definition of democracy is?
I think it's a cooperative approach to solving problems. My experience has been mainly with the Commission and commissioners, but just recently the MEPs have been given more power over decisions made, which, depending how you lobby and who you're lobbying, can be a good thing, or sometimes, depending on their bias, it can be more difficult.
And just to be clear, the commissioners are unelected, aren't they? And
they're the bureaucrats that deliver the legislation, but the MEPs, my understanding, have control over them, and they can have the final say. But for me, as someone who lobbies or has lobbied in the past within the Commission, it has always been very useful to be proactive within there and ensure that your message is put across, you garner support, and you work with your colleagues. And quite frankly, there has been a number of occasions that we have been able to be quite influential.
Okay, Adrian Rawlinson, do you buy that it's the MEPs who have the final say and that they're the ones who are elected?
Well, I've never worked in Brussels. I can only go off, as I said at the start, off the research that I've done independently by talking to people. But my understanding, because I was interested about this issue, about how the laws are made, and particularly bear in mind that I particularly dislike the way that big corporations seem to be able to bully and run governments, which I think many of us here would disagree with. And I think that's the whole point, is that the unelected commissioners are where these big corporations, that's where they nobble them, because what they do is go in Brussels in that nice square with some really nice restaurants. They take them out for lunch, and miraculously they get laws which always seem to support the big guys and hammer the little guys like us in Cumbria in the SME sector. Yeah. And it's not always malevolent in that way, but it's the example that I think John made when we were in Cartmel, is that not everybody who makes shutter doors in Carlisle wants to try and export to Budapest and Bucharest. They're quite happy they can sell some in Kendal.
Okay. Bill Lowther, do you agree with that? Do you think that the EU, it always favours the big guy rather than the little guy?
Well, no, I don't believe that. There will be a bit of that, you know. It's the way life works. But at the end of the day, influence is very, very important. And I believe that you'll have more influence within the club in terms of sorting that out, or those kind of things out, than you will outside the club. If you're not even at the table, it will be very difficult. In reality, within the same EU and with all its difficulties, the Germans managed to sell 2.5 and 3 times more to India than we do as the UK. And what we're doing, you know, is mourning, and if we don't watch it, complaining about the EU, when we need a little bit, you know, to be looking more at ourselves. That's the reality of it.
Okay, I want to come to some questions in the audience. Actually, the questioner, Raymond Hall, has got his hand up. Would you like to make a comment on what's been said so far?
Yeah, I would like to appeal to the Remain debaters just to listen very carefully to what their president says, President John Juncker, and I have a quotation here which leads right into this question about democracy. Europe's political leaders should stop taking notice of public opinion and start acting like proper Europeans.
And can I take a question from the lady at the back there, please?
This is a comment on democracy, really. We're about to vote on our membership of the EU. We elect our MEPs by something approaching a democratic system, proportional representation. We elect our Westminster MPs by a non-democratic, non-proportional system. How can we compare those two? Our MEPs are democratically elected by a fair system. Our MPs, we have a Conservative government who got 24% of the vote. That can't be called democracy. That cannot be called democracy.
Okay, thanks. Well, just a second. I'm going to bring Fiona Mills in here to respond to the comment that was made by the lady at the back there.
I actually agree with every word you said. Yes, our MEPs are democratically elected using a proportional system, but the fact is they have limited powers. The powers lie with the commissioners, and I totally agree that our Conservative elected government is not democratically elected. We need proportional representation in this country, and I would absolutely clamour for that. But the fact is the Conservatives did get the most votes in this country, and they are in government, so I suppose I can't argue too much with that, but I still support proportional representation. The fact there is the commissioners are unelected, Juncker is unelected, Donald Tusk is unelected, and Martin Schulz is unelected, and these presidents are the people with the power in the European Union.
Okay, Julie Ward, I mean, if I'm a voter and I don't like what the Conservative government is doing in Westminster, I could vote Labour at the next general election and I might get a Labour government. What can I do if I don't like what the EU's doing?
Well, the Commission can be dismissed by the European Parliament through a 2/3 majority vote of no confidence. So all these lies which have been going about we can't get rid of the Commission, we could. We know it would be very difficult to get rid of the government right now, even though only a small proportion of the country actually voted for them. The European Parliament is actually far more transparent than Westminster. You can watch it all on television. Every single debate is televised. Every single committee meeting is televised. So you can watch the work that we do to represent the Northwest and to represent the interests of the ordinary working people by asking difficult questions and by reminding the commissioners of their promises. I would like to see better democracy in our own country. I would like to see it in our schools. I would like to see it in the town halls. But I would also like to see it within Europe. But the point is to do that across all of the institutions and to make sure that we are teaching citizenship in schools so that young people from an early age understand what it means to take responsibility for being a citizen.
Okay, all right, thank you. We wanted a civilised debate tonight, so I'm going to come to the audience. There's a gentleman on the front row who's had his hand up for quite a long time. So I'm just going to come to him.
Listen, I think this issue of democracy is the key issue in this referendum. It's not immigration, it's not the economy. The economic arguments are minor one way or the other. The key issue here is democracy. Who controls our country?
Okay.
Only if we come out of Europe will we have the ability to throw out our government and to change things for the better.
Okay.
If we don't vote on the 23rd, we will be the EU is undemocratic and anti-democratic.
All right, I think we get the point. Okay, gentleman on the back row there, please.
Thank you. We talk about the Leave campaign talk about the EU being undemocratic. Last time I checked, I didn't vote directly for Nicky Morgan to be our education secretary. I didn't vote for George Osborne to be my chancellor. These people are appointed by members of parliament and by their party, just like the European Union appoints commissioners.
But they're elected on a manifesto, though, aren't they?
Yes.
You're elected government on a manifesto.
Yeah, and MEPs are elected on manifestos and on party points.
Commissioners are appointed on the basis of a public hearing where you can come and ask them questions and then you can hold them to account or you can ask the commission.
Okay, thanks, Julie
and
Ward.
You can dismiss them.
I'm going to bring in Brent Kennedy now because he's not spoken on this yet.
I can give the definitive answer to this question from the horse's mouth, because last year, as you know, the Greek people revolted against the austerity that was imposed on them by the EU, the IMF, the central bank, and which has caused mass poverty and misery in that country, while the banks who lent the corrupt politicians the money in the first place to finance Siemens and Mannesmann's tanks and aircraft that were sold to them, corruption. They were against austerity. Juncker, back in January 2015, on the eve of the elections, made it quite clear to suggest that anything is going to change because there's a new government in Athens is to mistake dreams for reality. there can be no democratic choice against the European treaties. And just to make it clear, Katainen, who the Vice President of the European Commission, former Finnish Prime Minister, went further. We don't change policies depending on elections. And Martin Schulz, Martin Schulz actually called for the Syriza government, who had a mandate in a referendum of 60% against austerity, to be deposed from government, and a dictatorship of technocrats from Brussels to be installed in Athens and to carry out their dictates until a suitable government could be elected.
All right,
we're not against Britain leaving the EU. We're against the EU in solidarity with the workers of Europe.
All right, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for tonight. But I just want to say thank you once again to our panel, Fiona Mills, to Brent Kennedy, to Adrian Rawlinson, to Julie Ward, Alistair McIntosh and Bill Lowther. And thanks again to our audience who've come from all across the county to be with us here. And thanks to the North Lakes Hotel in Penrith for hosting us here tonight. And thank you all as well for listening at home. Goodbye.